This next talk is going to be about the technology update for iRODS, and it's going to be given by me, the Chief Technologist, Kory. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. How do you? Hmm? Okay, maybe I'll click on it. Let's see. All right, it's working. Okay, so since last year's UGM, we've had two new releases of iRODS, 502 and then 435. That's our latest release. Um, you know, we want to thank our contributors. I think Tara already did this during the consortium update, but these are the people who make all this stuff go. And, thank you for making this stuff a reality. All right, so for 435, so this is the final release of the server. This does not mean the plugins and things will not continue to receive updates. That decision will be basically handled in a way that's like trivial and security updates. They will come in that. They will be delivered through security and trivial enhancements. With 435 being the final release of the server, this means that we want to make sure that we leave it in a good place, meaning, as stable as we can make it, so that people who cannot upgrade to iRODS 5 yet have a solid platform that they can continue to use for a good long time. For the 502 release, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail about what changed here. I'm just going to point out some highlights, that being support for Enterprise Linux 10 and Debian 13. I think the big thing here is that we have made plugin versioning independent of the server version. This is new for iRODS 5. People who are familiar with the 4.3 series and before, they know that plugins had shared the same version number as the server. And so iRODS 5 seemed like a good place where we could decouple things and allow the plugins to have their own version so that we can communicate more information through the plugin version number. Now, with this new scheme, we also include the version of the development package that the plugin was compiled against. If you look at the example here with the plugin name and the colored text, the 511 represents the plugin version, and the red text represents the iRODS development package or iRODS version that it was compiled for. So you always know based on the package name what version the plugin is designed for. We also made some modifications within the server to improve support for decoupled mode for the S3 resource plugin. There's been some enhancements around multi-byte character support for renaming collections. This was contributed, or the base implementation for those fixes were delivered by Ton Smile, and then was carried over the finish line by the core dev team. And then, of course, there's also some enhancements around the iCommands. In particular, we want to highlight IRSync because that was one that had not seen some attention for quite some time. If you want to know all the details of the release, we've included links at the bottom of the slide so that you can click on and see the release notes and learn more about that. So from this point, everything that I'm about to talk about is about iRODS 5.10. This, you might be asking, where is it, right? Well, it hasn't been released yet. It's still in development, but it's very close. Right now, the main goal is to get support for Ubuntu 26.04 into this release. And once that's done, that will mean this release will be ready, and we'll make it available to people. Again, there's a link at the bottom here so you can follow the progress. So again, from this point, everything that I'm about to talk about is about what's included, implemented, or in progress for 5.10 right now. Before we get into that, I want to talk about backwards compatibility. Backwards compatibility is very important to the consortium. And we know that it's very important to our users. And so some of the ways that we're going to uh, improve that situation is by we're no longer going to modify published packing instructions or data types and information that's sent across the wire. This means that people no longer have to worry about uh, their APIs or applications breaking with every release. If there is a backwards incompatible change, that will be communicated through release notes and also through the version number information. Because now that we follow semantic versioning, we can do that we can communicate more information through the version numbers, and you can be confident that we don't break things. Now, this does not apply to APIs and tools and libraries that we have declared to be experimental. Those things are going to continue to be free to change over time as we receive feedback from users. Okay, so the first thing that we will cover here for the main server process is that the iRODS 5.1.0 server, when it is available, it will no longer allow you to run the server with the root privileges. This is common for a lot of server applications. And so given that iRODS doesn't require root privileges for anything, we went ahead and made this change here. We also made it so that the server logs the user ID and group ID of the user who launched the server process. This, if it turns out that the user who launched the process does not have ownership of the server's account home directory, then we'll log a warning. We won't stop the server or stop it from being launched, but we will, log a message so the administrator will know that this has been done. All right, so one of the things throughout this talk, we're going to have a number of team members come up and talk about things that they have worked on. And the first one is going to be Alan King. Can we have Mike?
Hi. Yes, hi. I'm Alan, one of the developers on the team, and I'm going to talk about one of the goals that we had for the 5.1 server was getting us closer to FIPS 140-X compliance. This is a big deal for a lot of government institutions and other organizations, both in the US and abroad. And so that's something that we wanted to have for a while. One of the biggest things for getting that was the removal of MD5 usage inside the server. So for 5.1.0, we addressed this by changing the way that signed zone keys for server-to-server authentication work by using a zone key signing hash scheme configuration. This was introduced to allow for backwards compatibility because old servers only know how to do MD5 zone key signing. But you can, moving forward, use other hash schemes that do not involve MD5. We also converted a couple of these things that were using MD5 hashing rule bases, delay rules, and the mock archive resource plugins physical path generation are now using SHA-256. There are other places where MD5 is used throughout the server, including checksums, but you can just not use MD5. You can just use SHA-256. And we'll talk about native authentication now. So for 5.1.0, we're introducing a new authentication scheme that we're just calling iRODS authentication. It has a number of objectives, including strengthened security, token-based authentication, which is time-limited, required TLS or secure communications, and FIPS 140-X compliance, no MD5. So the current plan is to introduce this in iRODS 5, like I said, 5.1.0. In iRODS 6, we'd like to switch the default authentication scheme from native, which everyone's used to by now, to iRODS. And in iRODS 7, we'd like to remove native authentication. I'm sure people will have questions about that, but I'm happy to talk about that. So let's talk about the authentication scheme real quick. So in order to use this from a user's perspective, you're just going to change your authentication scheme to the iRODS authentication scheme. When you authenticate with the server, you're going to get back a session token that's held in a new file called the iRODS secrets file. when you set users' passwords, in order to completely get rid of the use of MD5, you need to use these new no scramble options. Now, they're a little bit strange, but the reason we did this is for backwards compatibility, which is one of our major goals moving forward, like Kory was talking about. You can also clear passwords and tokens for the new authentication scheme using a remove password mod user subcommand for iadmin. And you can remove session tokens, both expired or non-expired, for particular users or all users in case something bad happens to your catalog. We're also going to be packaging a script to clear legacy passwords if you choose to go all in on this thing with 5.0. Finally, there's a couple of grid configurations that were introduced for the new authentication scheme. We have password hashing parameters. So these are basically configuring the way that keys derived from passwords are stored. Right now, we only support scrypt and allow you to tweak all of those configurations based on your security requirements. We plan to support other algorithms, but we don't know what people want, so please let us know. There's a password storage mode. This basically will affect the default behavior of iPassword and setting users' passwords via iadmin mod user. So right now, the way things have always been is the legacy setting. So it's setting a user's password means you're changing their native password. We've introduced hashed, which means you're just setting their iRODS password, and both means you're setting both. So if you want to do like a hybrid situation, you can do both. You just want to go all in on iRODS, you do hashed. Legacy is the default for iRODS 5.1 and the way that it's always worked, right? And finally, we have the token lifetime in seconds. This behaves just like your TTL if you're familiar with INIT. And that's it.
Let's see. Thank you, Alan. All right, so our next speaker will be Martin. He's going to talk about work on the resource rebalance operation.
All right. So for the resource rebalance operation, again, this is talking about 5.1.0, but before we get into that, let's talk about the pre-5.1 behavior. So previously in the pre-5.1 behavior, the rebalance operation, typically when you execute it, it halts on the first issue encountered during that operation. This is expected because we wanted to have a simple program that when it executes through to completion, then you know that any rebalancing operation that could be done has been done. Otherwise, there was like a couple of replicas that cannot be rebalanced, and you need to handle that. So that was all fine, except that could potentially require a lot of manual intervention. That was not desired. So starting from 5.0, the rebalance operation was updated. So that way, if there are some replicas that could not be rebalanced, the rebalance operation will still continue on all possible operations and will execute through to completion. This means that the handling of bad replicas can be handled separately, and any items that previously wouldn't have been replicated in pre-5.1.0 will be replicated. Also noted, we have a new error code to signify that there's a partial success, and that is rebalance not complete. So we can see an example of this. In the sort of code example up above, you can see that I run the rebalance operation, and at the very end, say that there was an issue encountered in rebalancing some of the replicas. You see the rebalance not complete, and following, you have two queries you can run to go ahead and query what effectively, in this case, data objects cause the issue or cause the rebalance to be not complete. These are noted both in the slide and also in the iRODS documentation. So if you don't need to take a picture, you don't worry about that. But you can see in the following example that we were able to get three data objects, their names, the collections, that kind of mark that these need to be handled if you want the rebalance operation to take care of it in the future. And likewise, you can see the following it's just a brief note of the number of replicas that were not in a good state and thus cause rebalance operation fail. Yeah, I hope everybody enjoys the new 5.0 behavior. Rebalance should be a lot nicer.
Thank you, Martin. All right, so now we're going to talk about the random scheme vault path policy. So we've improved this. So we've introduced two new microservices, basically one that enables an administrator to specify a style. Right now we have two styles. The reason why we added this is because it is when using the random scheme in released versions of iRODS, you run the possibility of encountering file name collisions. And people have reported instances of this. And so these microservices enable us to specify, hey, I want to extend the capabilities of the random scheme. And I want you to basically generate an additional string of a random length, and which the admin can control. And through this, you're able to reduce the chance of a file name collision. This is totally the decision of how long this string is completely in the administrator's control. So as far as core server updates, those are the main ones that I wanted to highlight for the 5.1 release. But I also wanted to make sure that we point out some additional updates to the server that will arrive as well. For instance, the setup iRODS.py script can now be used to configure an iRODS server with TLS out of the box. So this can come as self-signed certificates in which the setup script can actually be used to generate these for you. This is nice for testing environments and whatnot, but you also have the ability to tell the setup script, I have certificates from a certificate authority, and I want you to use those. We've made some improvements we fixed a number of bugs in physical quotas. This work was carried out by Derek. And then we've also had some bug fixes and enhancements for the jQuery 2 query engine. We've also made an enhancement to the dstream library. This is something that I know was planned for a long time, but we just never got around to it until now. But dstream used to have, one of its limitations is that it could not report iRODS error codes to the user. So you would always get some generic error code from this API, but we've extended its capabilities to now track and expose the iRODS error code. And so this is going to be very beneficial to applications such as iStream, iTouch, the HTTP API, the S3 API. We've tweaked the iCommands to now compare the version of the server it is connecting to with its version. And so now if there's a mismatch on the major version level, then the iCommands will now warn the user of this potential compatibility issue and allow the user to take action. Of course, this doesn't stop the operation from being carried out, but it does allow the person to react and do something about it, such as switch to a version of the iCommands that are more compatible. And of course, this warning can be suppressed if it's, causing issues. And with every new enhancement to the server where it makes sense, we are now beginning to introduce feature test macros. These are available at compile time for C and C++ libraries. It is also available at runtime for languages such as Python, Java, Go. And so you can query the actual server itself and ask, well, what's your capabilities? And with these, you can make better decisions around what your application how it should handle certain operations when certain features are not available versus when they are available. And so this is proven to be very helpful in maintaining source compatibility across iRODS versions. And of course, we also have made more deprecations and removed some unused functionality within the server. All right, so moving on. Now we're going to talk a little bit about build and testing. And so all of our plugins have been updated to support this new option for the build hooks. That is, you can now specify the version of the server which you would like to compile the plugin against. And so this is very convenient because now it means that you no longer have to have the packages available on your machine. This is most common for people who are familiar with the development environment and use that development environment to build iRODS packages. We're already making use of this now for releases for 4.3 as well. We have automated all of our plugin testing and GitHub Actions. The only two plugins that do not have this yet are the Python Rule Engine plugin and the Audit plugin. The Audit plugin is undergoing a heavy overhaul, so this work, the GitHub Actions efforts will happen after that work is done. And for the Python Rule Engine plugin, this one is a bit more complicated because the test suite is basically running all the same tests that are run against the native rule engine, which takes about 13 hours. So we need to figure out how to cut down on that time. Let's see. We've also updated the testing environment to not depend on the Docker Compose Python module. This is primarily because the Python module for Docker is deprecated. If you want to know more about that, please find us. Okay, so now we're going to come back to Martin and we're going to have him talk about policy composition, rule engine plugin.
So, policy composition rule engine plugin. It's been released in its 0.10 state. Highly recommend that you check out the link below, as that is the announcement page, but it also contains some links to previous presentations about the policy composition plugin. And it also goes into a lot more depth than we will hear because this is just a high-level overview of it, but I recommend it. So as an overview of one of the more important, or one of the more major parts, I should say, of the policy composition plugin, it's the abstraction that is provided by the event handlers. So if we kind of frame it from a single point of view, you have an input operation, and from that input operation, you could potentially invoke a whole bunch of dynamic PEPs. These dynamic PEPs, if you wanted to write policy, you would need to insert it into the appropriate PEPs, and you need to recall it. And should that policy ever need to change, you need to go back and also move back to the appropriate spots. This can be very difficult to manage. So one of the benefits of the policy composition is that we provide event handlers which provide an abstraction over the dynamic PEPs. So instead of having to manage all these items, you just need to handle, for example, create, read, or write operations, and then that would invoke your policy. It also makes modification of that a lot easier. So as an example, we have a configuration right here for data objects. This is an event handler for data objects. If you look towards the middle of the object, you should see an events member. This basically, we subscribe to several events that we want to act upon. So in this case, put, create, write, and registration. If we look a bit above, those of you familiar or have toyed around with dynamic PEPs, you may notice the post clause. You can choose when to invoke the policy. So in this case, it's post. And then towards the bottom, you see another member that says policy to invoke. This is where you put the rule or policy that you want to invoke should this event come up. So this would just go in your plugin configuration in the server config. Yeah, if this interests you, I highly recommend, like I said, that I'm going to go back. Check out the link right here because the previous talks go over a lot more detail, and well, I hope you all play with it so you can get feedback.
Thank you, Martin. All right. So the Logical Quotas Rule Engine plugin, we've had 6 releases since UGM 2025. The main change for this plugin is that it now uses RODS admin connections for all quota updates. So the reason for this is that it resolves a number of issues around server redirects and permissions. And there was also, this is mostly the same thing, but the metadata guard, if you had that installed and configured on a server as well, there was also cases where it would cause weird interactions between the two. And so by making this change, we've resolved that issue as well. Storage tiering has had 3 releases since the last UGM. This is primarily the main fix for this is that we have addressed a bug in which the admin keyword was not being set when the local RISE admin would attempt to compute checksums on behalf of the storage tiering capability plugin. And so normally what would end up happening is that when replication or an operation would be triggered, or something would have to be tiered out, and a checksum would have to be computed of some sort at some point. The RISE admin will be blocked from doing that because the admin keyword was not set, and so we've corrected that with this release. The Universal Mass Storage Service Resource plugin has received a few enhancements and improvements. One in particular is the escaping of single quotes and paths. And so we have now updated the plugin to handle that. This feature is disabled by default to not affect people's existing deployments, but it is available. The default will likely change in iRODS 6, but not for 5. It will remain disabled for the lifetime of 5. We've also updated it to support the context string syntax supported in other rule engine, supported by other resource plugins. But it also still supports its original context string syntax as well, in that it would accept just the name of the script or the executable to run when it needed to take action. All right, so now we're going to have Marcus come up and talk about the audit plugin.
Hello. As was mentioned before, we're currently in the middle of a giant overhaul of the audit plugin, probably part 2 of 3 of the refactor. So the major highlights of this particular part of the refactor is we are now exposing most of the Cupid Proton settings, and the Cupid Proton is the library that we use for AIMQP. We're exposing most of the Cupid Proton settings as configuration options now, so you can change your message durability and stuff like that. We have introduced a new fail-safe mode to block unauditable operations. So if the plugin fails to connect to the AMQP server or has a problem sending a message, you can set it up so that that operation cannot continue, because some deployments are interested in if auditing fails, that operation doesn't happen. We are also changing the way that we handle AIMQP connections so that they are per operation instead of per message. The eventual goal is to have them be per session, but we're not quite there yet. And we're just doing a general modernization sweep.
All right. Thank you, Marcus. All right. So now we're going to talk about the Python iRODS client. Do we have Dan?
No, you weren't hearing me. Now you're hearing me. Is that
Dan,
right?
are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Kory,
Oh,
can
yes.
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll go over the updates and fixes to the Python iRODS client library for the past year. These are encapsulated by the updates version 3.20 and 3.30 that you see the URLs for below. So quickly, we do operate, of course, with iRODS 5 server. We can authenticate through the PAM interactive scheme, and also authenticated group admins can do their expected operations capabilities seamlessly through the client endpoints. There's also increased utility for tickets and better utility also for metadata. We'll see both of these in code examples actually after this slide. Also, because of a change to non-demonic threads in Python 3.9, it became a little more unpredictable to try to send a signal to a Python process, a client process in which puts or gets were ongoing of large data objects, uploads or downloads of large objects. And also in the Python iRODS client library, it's quite easy to admit large categories of columns like all of data object, all of collection, and you may find for optimal use for stability, even sometimes you need to exclude one or two columns selectively. You can use a new capability that's been introduced to basically you throw a negative sign in front of a column and it will subtract that from the list of result columns that will be coming back from the query. Also, with each push to GitHub, code is checked, code is tested. The test suites are run with the requisite versions of the Python interpreter and the iRODS server. Okay, on to the example slides. Okay, we see an example here where on line 4, data object, a reference to a data object is created. This object is actually not belonging to the RODS admin who is authenticated through the session. So we would expect to have to turn on an admin flag to be able to modify its AVUs. So that's what we're doing, is turning on the admin flag in line 7. And one of the bug fixes that I mentioned about better utility for metadata is illustrated here below. If you try to change these admin and timestamps flags independently of each other, the bug that existed before was that trying to change the one might allow the other one to reset to its default value of false. So with that bug in place before the fix, line 17 would have failed. You would have lost the admin flag value of true. And that's no longer true. That's been fixed. Okay, next slide. We also have basically a free function available, which can help you, for example, duplicate the output of iTicket ls. That's what this example does. And basically, it's actually a one-line function. It just produces a generator you can iterate over, and that produces all the tickets that would or should be available to the authenticated user. Yeah, and finally, we have this free function, which can be called abort parallel transfers, which can be called to end all ongoing threads or records of any transfers going on, and that can be called from, for example, signal handlers or or exception handlers, as you see in this example.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Okay. So now we're going to have Justin come up and talk about the Globus connector.
Okay, we have a few minor updates to the Globus connector last year. First, we updated the code so that it's compatible with iRODS 5. There was a seg fault on rename operation when using the FTP client, and we fixed that. For the checksum and hashes, so Globus can request quite a few different checksum and hash types when you upload a file, and that is different from the iRODS hashes or checksum that are stored in iRODS. So it's actually stored when you use Globus, it's stored in metadata on the object. But because
they can request a lot more checksums and hashes than what iRODS provided. That the hashers were all kind of in the Globus code, but now those iRODS now supports more, so that's all in the iRODS code base that's compiled that Globus uses when it compiles the plugin or the connector. And so depending on the iRODS version, we'll either use the checksum hashes that are still in the Globus code, or we'll use the iRODS versions. Finally, we found recently that in high latency environments, when you're calculating a checksum, we have to reread the entire file for Globus to get the checksum back to Globus. And the buffer size was fixed and it was pretty small. So we added an option to increase the buffer size, and that improved performance considerably when we were in a high latency environment. And then finally, there are some just code improvements that were made. Variable length arrays were updated to alloc A function. Boost format and string stream were updated to format lib, and CJSON was updated to nlum and JSON.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go through these a little bit quick because we're running low on time. The HTTP API, we had a release just before UGM. This fixed a number of bugs in the server as far as like crashing due to unexpected, basically bugs in the code as far as which resulted in the server crashing. We fixed an issue where the group permissions were being expanded for data objects unnecessarily. There's been some improvements around configuration validation. And I think the main thing here is that well, two things. We've added new configuration properties around parallel write streams, in which administrators can now set limits on the number of streams across all users so that people don't just exhaust all resources on the HTTP API as well as the iRODS server itself. And then also going back to dstream, the enhancement around exposure of iRODS error codes means that the HTTP API will now be able to report the more specific information around failed write operations. This code has been implemented, but is not enabled in the 070 release because that requires the iRODS 510 development library. And so that will be enabled by default. Well, it'll be enabled on the next release of the HTTP API. iRODS for J has had a number of releases since last UGM. We've added support for PAM Interactive, improved support for secure communication, multi-byte support, multi-byte character support. We've improved compatibility with Windows, and also all the testing, like the PRC, is fully automated in GitHub Actions. And that work was motivated by work on CyberDuck. CyberDuck has now been refactored to use iRODS for J instead of jargon. This work was initially done by an intern and completed by the core dev team. We've included links to the PR so that you can go look and see how that came to be. This improvement comes with support for parallel transfer over 1247, the addition of common iRODS configuration options within the CyberDuck profile, and then support for more support for secure communication and PAM support. PAM being specifically PAM password at this time. We've received a contribution from an external contributor in the form of updates to the iDrop client. This person spent time updating the project to be compatible with iRODS 4.3 and later. And we've added shell scripts to make building this project on Windows and Linux easier. All right, so internships. As Terrell mentioned in the Consortium update, we've had, in summer 2025, we had 3 interns come in and work on various important projects for iRODS. that being PAM interactive authentication for the PRC. We had another one update the iRODS zone management tool to not rely on the materials UI framework. And they also added an enhancement for group by in jQuery 2. And then, of course, the CyberDuck effort. All these projects have now been completed and merged and will be available and are either available now or will be available in a later release. And also going back to the senior team project from fall of last year. So we worked with a group of 4 students from the University of San Francisco in doing some performance testing around compression in the iRODS clients. This is not the server, this is just clients for now. They used the PRC and iRODS for J, and they also tested this in various environments, both simulated and using real networks, constructing with involving AWS. This set of testing involved a number of compression libraries, and what they found is, of course, the binary encoding is superior to the XML encoding for transfer, but they also, learned that compression is beneficial for slow networks, not so much for very fast networks. And then also the Z standard offers the best balance in all areas as far as like data movement and things like that. And LZ4 compression was recommended for time critical operations. All of their efforts is going to be it's going to influence how we move forward with compression and iRODS. Okay. So future work, this is after the release of the 5.10. There are a number of things that we want to do. Some of these things come from the roadmap. Other things just come from, working on existing bugs and issues. Some of the main things I want to point out are, we want, just like the logical quotas plugin, we want to absorb the metadata guard rule engine plugin into the server. We've heard requests about improving support for archive files, and so we want to spend some time there and try to build out something that works better for people. There's some work to be done around database connection management. We want to implement the new iRODS authentication scheme that Alan talked about earlier for all the client libraries. We want to improve the log messages within the server, provide better tools for people. And then we want to continue to automate all testing for iRODS however we can. And with that, thank you.